have this terrible habit of misplacing my keys and my wallet every single day. I'll come home from work or being out, and within just a few minutes, I've put my keys and my wallet somewhere where I cannot find them. And I've tried everything to correct this and fix this. I find the keys in the strangest places, by the way, too. I mean, I found them one time behind the toaster in the kitchen. Found them in the backyard. Found them in the laundry hamper downstairs. I don't know how they're getting there. But I'm terrible at finding my keys in my wallet. And Hannah has been so gracious and patient with me over the past 11 years of marriage because she's put up with me losing my keys in my wallet on a daily basis. And she always says, like, can't you just put them in a place where you'll remember them? And the truth is I can't. I try really hard. I just can't change this about myself. And that's an excuse that you can use with like a wallet and a set of keys, right? But can you imagine if I use that excuse with other more important things, like my kids? I go to the zoo and I come back without my kids, and Hannah's like, where are the kids? And I'm like, I don't know. And she's like, why can't you put them in the same place every time? And I'm like, I don't know. I just can't change this about myself, Hannah. It's an excuse that doesn't work when it comes to more important things. And so finally, I've got this quick fix. I went out, I've tried getting a hook that I can hang it on. That doesn't work. I tried making my keys bulkier so I'd remember them. Doesn't work. Finally, I went out and bought some air tags. And if you don't know what an air tag is like a little Bluetooth GPS device that helps me find my wallet, my keys within minutes. I mean, I'm no longer spending hours scouring through the house trying to find them. I find them there in that second within just minutes of opening up the app on my phone. It's a quick fix, but what I found is that even though it's a quick fix, it's not a permanent solution to my problems. Like I still lose my keys in my wallet all the time, and I appreciate the quick fix, but it hasn't led to any permanent results. And I love quick fixes. I'm all about quick fixes, but the older I get, the more I recognize that quick fixes don't always lead to permanent results. They don't lead to permanent life change necessarily. Like how many of us have joined a fad diet, and it has promised us that we could lose 20 pounds in a week, and we get on it, and sure enough, we start seeing these quick results, but then as soon as we get to the end of that week, we're out shopping, and we go through the candy aisle, which has the Cadbury eggs, and you realize your fridge is empty, so you got to stock up like a squirrel for the winter, and then you end up eating all of it and gaining the weight back. Anybody, just me here? Okay, thank you, Sandy. It's like a quick fix, but it doesn't lead to permanent behavioral change. Our society is filled with quick fixes. Maybe it's not something like a diet, but maybe it's something even more serious. Maybe for you, the quick fix is a glass or two or three of alcohol or wine at the end of the night to silence that anxiety or that worry or that depression. And it's like, yeah, it gives you that quick fix. Like it numbs you for a minute, but then the next morning you wake up and it comes back with a vengeance. It's a quick fix, but it doesn't lead to permanent life change. Our culture is filled with these, from pornography to alcohol to promises of a fad diet or get-rich-quick schemes. But all these quick fixes don't lead to a lasting result. And the older I've gotten, the more I want to see permanent results in my life. Like I don't want to be 50 struggling with the same things I was struggling at 33. I don't want to be 70 struggling with the same things I was struggling with at 50. And maybe it's just this weekend and the past weekend before that of, being a part of my wife's grandpa's funeral and reflecting on his life and a life well lived. But the older I get, the more I want to live and love like Jesus, not just on Sundays, but every day of my life. I want to get to the end of my life and be able to look back and say, hey, I wasn't perfect, but I sought the Lord with all of my heart, with all my strength, with all of my mind. The question then becomes, if you're in the same boat as me, how do we actually make permanent life change? Like, how do we not settle for the quick results in our lives and instead truly see the transformational power of Christ at work in our lives? How do we see that transformation so when we get to 80 or 90 or 100 or 110, who knows? How do we know, how can we be in that place where we can look back and say, God has truly transformed our lives? We weren't perfect, but we sought the Lord with all of our hearts and soul and mind and strength. Well, to answer that question, I want to look at Ruth chapter 3. We're in a series on the book of Ruth right now, and Emily preached Ruth 2 last week. Didn't she do an amazing job? Can we give her a hand for doing such a great job? I heard nothing but positive things and got to listen to the sermon, and just, Emily, you set me up so well with this sermon, so we're just so grateful for you and you serving double duty, worship and preaching that day. Ruth chapter 3 is one of these stories in the Bible, one of these chapters in the Bible, which is really confusing. Like, there's so many cultural practices and cultural customs and cultural nuances wrapped up in this passage that it can become really confusing really quickly if we don't understand them. And so what I want to do, as we always do with Scripture, we want to understand the context in which it was written. And as we understand the context, we'll begin to understand what God was speaking to the Israelites of that day. And in doing so, we'll begin to understand what God is speaking to us today. So Ruth chapter 3, you can open your Bibles. We'll also have it on the screen for you in the NRSV version. It starts off like this. Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, I need to seek some security for you, so that it may be well with you. Now here's our kinsman Boaz, with whose young women you have been working. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now wash and anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she said to her, "All that you say, I will do." Now we just pause there. Without understanding the cultural customs of the day, this can sound a bit scandalous at best. A little bit sketchy. I mean, here you have this woman telling Ruth, put on your best clothes, put on your best perfume, wait till this man is alone in his room sleeping, maybe after he's had a few drinks, and then approach him and lie down at his feet. Not to mention that idea of lying at the feet, that just sounds, I don't know, maybe a little degrading, doesn't it? Like, when I think of it, I think of two things. I either think of my dog laying at the foot of my bed, or I think of Michael Scott in the TV show The Office laying on the ottoman at the foot of Jan's bed. If you don't know, it's okay. They both evoke the same idea. Either way, this doesn't look good at first glance. But we have to understand the cultural practice. What exactly is happening here? Well, first and foremost, we have to understand that dating was not common, or it wasn't like we do it today. You know, you didn't ask someone out for coffee and then go out and, go to a few movies and eventually get engaged, and eventually that would lead to a marriage. No, you might interact with people who live in your town or your city, but ultimately you'd get engaged, and then shortly thereafter you'd get married. There's no dating period. The other thing we should understand, especially when it comes to lying down at someone's feet, this is a cultural practice that servants in that time period would take on. So they would lay at the feet of their masters, and it was a way of being available and present for whatever the master wanted. It's not scandalous, it's a common practice. And in doing this, in Ruth coming and laying at Boaz's feet, she's simply communicating this, that she's a servant, that she's humble, and she's meek, and she's there to serve. She's not coming in with any demands. The other thing we should know about this passage is in verse 2, the use of the word kinsman. The Hebrew word there is the word goel. Go ahead and look at your neighbor and say goel. Real guttural G, goel. Go ahead and look at him. Say it like you're mad. Yeah, there you go. You got it. You learned a Hebrew word today and how to pronounce it well. The term goel is this term often translated as kinsman redeemer. And there's a number of passages in the Bible with kinsman redeemer in it. But most notably is Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10, where it describes that the goel has a responsibility of carrying on the family name by marrying a childless widow in the family. And this is Ruth, a childless widow. She had lost her husband. Her father-in-law had died. She's a foreigner living in a foreign land. And so it's the duty of the person next in line, the kinsman redeemer, to carry on her lineage by marrying into the family, and in doing so it keeps the land in the family. It safeguards that widow. It safeguards the property and the posterity of the family. And so this is Boaz's duty as a kinsman redeemer, to marry Ruth. It says in verse 6, so she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk and was in a contented mood, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. And at midnight the man was startled and turned over, and there lying at his feet was a woman. He said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are next of kin. And we want to pause there because this is an odd thing too, right? This is kind of strange. Why is Ruth asking that a cloak be put over her? It's certainly not a scandalous move on her part. She's not even, it's not like she has a chill and she just needs to be warmed up a bit. This is a significant moment that Jewish people still practice today. When a Jewish man marries a Jewish woman, he takes the length of his talish, his cloak, and he puts it over the woman at the wedding ceremony. And in doing so, he's signifying that he's bringing that woman under the protection of his household. And God actually uses this language as well. It's really interesting. Ezekiel 16:8, God says, I spread my wing over you and covered your nakedness. Yes, I swore an oath to you and entered into a covenant with you, and you became mine, says the Lord God. And so in this moment, Ruth is essentially asking Boaz to fulfill his duties as a kinsman redeemer, to marry her. I probably wouldn't recommend using this as your model of how to propose to somebody, but this is significant because here's Ruth, and this is something we should notice. Ruth could have done this weeks ago when she was starving, when she was hungry, when she was begging for food. She could have seen Boaz at first sight and said, you are my kinsman redeemer, fulfill your duty, and redeem me, marry me in this moment. But instead, Ruth she's patient, and she's humble, and she's meek, and I think what it communicates is that she has a deep trust in God, that God will open the doors in His timing. Ruth is an example for us of what it looks like to be a person of integrity and to have trust in God. And then you have Boaz on the other side, a man of deep integrity. It says this, he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. This last instance of your loyalty is better than the first. You have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. For all the assembly of my people know that you are a worthy woman. But now, though it is true that I am a near kinsman, there is another kinsman more closely related than I. Remain this night, and in the morning, if he will act as the next of kin for you, good. Let him do it. But if he is not willing to act as next of kin for you, then as the Lord lives, I will act as next of kin for you. Lie down until the morning. So here's Boaz saying, I do want to marry you, but the right thing is to go to the next of kin. And so Boaz, in a similar fashion, he's modeling patience and humility and integrity. And he's actually going to go to, in chapter 4, to this other person that is next in line and give them the option to marry Ruth. Verse 14 says, so she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before one person could recognize another. For he said, it must not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Now, this is also not a scandalous attempt at Boaz to hide anything. One commentator says this, that it was just that Boaz didn't want this nearest kinsman to learn that Ruth was now invoking her right to marriage to a Goel before Boaz could tell him personally. The chapter ends with Boaz sending Ruth home with more barley than she can possibly carry. And Naomi is happy and elated. She says, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but we'll settle the matter today." So it's a passage with so much cultural practice and tradition and nuance. And if we don't really understand this, we can't understand what it's speaking to us today. And you may say, well, this is really nice, right? This is a story of two people with integrity who go about their marriage the right way, taking the right steps and going about the right process. But where is God in this story? You notice there's no mention of God in Ruth chapter 3. And then when you look at the 30,000-foot view of the book, God is hardly mentioned at all in the book of Ruth. He is a few times, but almost as an outside figure. So the question becomes, what is this communicating about God? What is the book of Ruth telling us about who our God is? I think to answer that, we have to spoil the ending a little bit. We have to look ahead to chapter 4, where Boaz and Ruth do get married. Here you have Ruth. She's been in the pit. She has had her life torn apart. It's fallen apart around her. She lost her husband. She's had to move to a foreign land where she's viewed as an enemy. She's there with her mother-in-law. She has no support. She can't work a job. She basically has to beg, and God redeems her life through her faithful obedience, such that not only does she marry Boaz, but they have a kid named Obed. And that kid grows up and has a kid named Jesse, and that kid grows up and has a kid named David, who becomes the king of Israel. You fast forward down the lineage, and out of that line comes the risen Savior, the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Ruth was in the dirt. She couldn't imagine that her life could be redeemed by any stretch of the imagination. And yet God used her faithful obedience and her integrity to bring about his will here on earth. I think that's one of the main messages of this story that we have to understand, that God uses the faithful obedience of his people to see his will done here on earth. And some people here need to hear that today. Some people watching online, you need to hear this, because you're in a pit. You're in a situation in life where you're dealing with grief and hardship and pain and broken relationships. You're struggling with illness, or someone in your family is ill, and you're constantly asking God, like, when are you going to fix this situation? Maybe you struggle with anxiety and depression, and sometimes it feels like there's no way out. And what this is communicating to you and to us today is that if we will be faithful, if we will follow Jesus even in the hard times, God can do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine on the other side of that. You are in a season right now, a season that is difficult, but every season comes to an end. There is hope. There's hope on the other side. And if this is the case, then we must ask the question, if God uses our faithful obedience to bring about his will here on earth, we should ask the question, how do we finish well? How do we not just, live and love like Jesus on Sundays or in a season of life when things are going particularly well, but how do we finish well? How do we get to the end of our lives and look back and see that we have been faithful? How do we grow in obedience? How do we grow in integrity? Well, I think this story speaks a lot to how we grow in integrity and obedience to God. And I think the first thing that we need to take away from this is that cultivating a life of integrity is not passive, it's active and strategic. Cultivating a life of integrity, of obedience to God, is not passive, it's active and strategic. I'll illustrate it like this. For a while, my mom, who is in her late 50s, not 60 yet, I think. Sorry, Mom, if you're watching this. In her 40s, she got really into weightlifting a while ago, and she would join these competitions. And my mom's a really small woman, and so she would do all these exercises. And the one she really excelled at was called the deadlift. If you don't know what a deadlift is, you're basically bending over and you're picking up the weight, right? And it uses your whole body. It's a full body workout. And my mom did really well at this. In fact, she set a world record for her age group and for her weight at one point, which was incredible. 280 pounds lifted. It was wild. And so what you should know about me, though, is that, number one, we have a little weight gym in our basement, so I like lifting a lot. And Hannah and I put the kids down and go down there and lift some weights. Number two, I am the most competitive person you'll ever meet. And so when my mom set a world record, I can't let that world record stand. I've got to beat it. And so I've been on this journey of doing my absolute best to beat my mom's world record. But here's the thing I've realized. You don't just wake up one day and lift 280 pounds. You have to plan. You have to have this whole system. You have to strengthen your legs first. And you do these specific exercises for weeks and weeks and months with your legs, and then your core and your arms. And then you have to have a special belt that you wear when you do those really heavy lifts. And you got to have the weight equipment in general. You don't just wake up one day and deadlift 280 pounds. And in the same way, you don't just wake up one day with integrity. You don't just wake up one day with this natural ability to be completely obedient to God. It takes time. It takes a strategy. It takes being active, taking the steps daily to follow God and to live and love like Jesus. And so I want to give us some ways that we can be active and strategic this week. Some really tangible take-homes that you can go home, and I believe if you start this week, if you put some of these things into play in your own life, it will lead you closer and closer to God. It will help you grow in obedience. It will help you grow in integrity. So I've got 3 things that you can start doing this week. One is this: set your standards in advance. Set your standards in advance. One of the callings that God has placed on my life as not even as a pastor, just as a Christian, is helping men who struggle with an addiction to pornography. Over the past 6 years, especially in ministry, I've had multiple conversations with individuals, and I haven't had to seek these out. These people have come to me, and we've had conversations. I'm able to look back on my experience as a teenager in seeking freedom and getting the tools to be free from this addiction and help other people through their own process of freedom. And in doing so, one thing I've noticed with almost every man, I recognize it in myself, and when I struggled, is this, that many men don't have any standards that they put in advance. They don't have these rules of behavior that they've put into play so that when temptation comes, they can know how to act, how to respond. Things like just getting rid of your phone for a time period, getting rid of your computer, or putting it somewhere visible where people can see it all the time. They haven't set those standards in advance. I have a really maybe extreme standard that I put in my own life, and that's that anytime anything on social media or the internet comes up that is remotely sketchy or anything along those lines, I report it. There's always a little bar where you can report it as inappropriate, as something you don't want to see. And I'm pretty sure I have convinced Facebook and Instagram that I'm a 4-year-old child because I report every single thing that comes across my feed. I've set the standard in advance. I will not expose myself to things that could lead down a bad road. You have to set the standards in advance. And that's not just with pornography. That's in every area of life. Some of you may struggle with gossip. And you've got to set this standard in advance that when you engage in conversation with someone, the minute it turns to gossip, you will turn around and walk away. You have to set the standard in advance. Some of you, maybe there's a struggle with alcohol or substance abuse, and you have to make the decision that you're not going to put yourself in situations or circumstances where you could be tempted by that. You have to set your standards in advance if you want to grow in obedience to Christ. So number one, set your standards in advance. Number two, major on God and not your circumstances. Major on God and not your circumstances. This feels really weird to say because it feels like I'm bragging. I've run 2 marathons in my life, but to kind of mediate that, I lost to a guy with no shoes on. So it's not all that impressive. And when I say run, it was more like I dragged myself. So not trying to brag or boost myself up anyway. But I remember, like, along the marathon course, people always make these signs to encourage people to move along. And some are funny, some are serious, but I would see this sign about every mile in every race that I've run, and people write on it, "Trust your training." And they'll hold it up high, and it's this reminder that you've put in miles and miles of work. You've put in the months and months of training. You know you can do this. You've run up to 20, 22 miles. You've pushed yourself to that point. You can run this race because of the training that you did. And in the same way, when it comes to our faith, we've got to major on God and not our circumstances. We have to put the training in advance. We have to know God. We have to actually know His character, to dwell on who He is. We have to put time into studying the Word day after day so that when we hit those circumstances, those life challenges, and those struggles, we don't let those determine our faith. We let our knowledge of who God is determine our faith and our obedience and our ability to walk forward. We remember when things are difficult that God is our ever-present help in times of trouble. We remember when we face that anxiety that we are called to not worry about anything. We remember when we are struggling with grief that our Creator sees us and He grieves with us and alongside of us. We major on God and not our circumstances. We put in the training, we put in the time beforehand so that when we face the hardship in life, we can respond in obedience. So set your standards in advance, major on God and not your circumstances. And number 3, personal integrity cannot be built on its own. It's a house you cannot build on your own. You can certainly try, but you desperately need other men and women in your life who are committed to walking beside you and encouraging you, to supporting you, to calling you out when maybe you're not walking along the right path. You need those people in your life. Right now, I'm very blessed to have a handful of people who I can go to and I can be honest about my struggles with, but who can also be honest with me about where I need to improve, where I need to grow. You need to seek those relationships out, and they take time. They're not something that happens overnight. We've been kind of talking about this throughout the summer. It takes time to build those mentor relationships. But building a life of obedience to Christ is not passive. It's active and strategic. You have to seek out those friendships, seek out those mentor figures in your life. So set your standards in advance, major on God and not your circumstances, and don't build it on your own. Surround yourself with people who love Jesus. I'm going to have the worship team come back up. As I just share this last bit, I got an email from Norma Grover, who her father was a pastor here years and years ago. And I was inquiring about the old church building across the road. And on our old church building, there used to be a big neon sign that said, "I am the way." And this is what she said. She said, "When my parents moved to Gates to pastor in 1946, they were to follow Reverend Adam Shea, who was seriously ill. Over the front door of the Gates Wesleyan Church was a neon sign that read, 'I am the way,' under a neon cross. It came on automatically with a timer, and it had been purchased by the Shea family in honor of the retiring pastor. The church was on a 2-lane road with dirt shoulders, but it was red from sunset to dawn as a colored sign shared the message that Jesus is the way. And that sign testified to the community for many decades. And as I've thought about this message and this idea of us being a people of integrity, being a people who truly seek to obey God in all of our lives, I can't help but envision this neon sign that as we follow Jesus faithfully, not just in the good times, but in the hard times, that will serve like that neon sign on the side of Long Pond Road, lighting up the darkness of the community of Gates and the city of Rochester around it, serving as an example to those who are far from Jesus, who don't know how desperately they need the saving hope and love of Jesus. 2 Corinthians 4:6 said, "For God said, let light shine out of darkness. And he made his light shine in our hearts." I wonder what would happen if we truly sought to be obedient, truly sought to live lives of integrity each and every day. How that would begin to shape the community we live in. How would that change the relationship with your family members, with your friends, with your kids' teachers in school? How would that affect the schools? How would that affect the older folks in your community who are sitting in retirement homes right now, who desperately need just someone to connect with them and show them the love of Jesus? Let light shine out of darkness so that his light may shine in our hearts. I'm going to ask Pastor Hannah to pray before we stand for worship.